Ukraine is a sovereign country that was living peacefully within its own borders, and then another country decided to violate those borders and bring 130,000 troops across into their country.
What about an idea that's put forward by General Philip Breedlove, a US military advisor, that the war is now very focused in the east of Ukraine, the Donbass region. His idea is that we should establish a NATO forward base in West Ukraine to better support that fight in the east. Would you ever consider that as a notion and supporting that in NATO?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I mean, Ukraine is a sovereign country, and the Ukrainian government still has a sovereign right to have whoever it wishes into its country. Now, I think that whilst there are active combat operations within Ukraine, we're still in the same place as the discussion that you and I were having maybe kind of 2 or 3 months ago at the start of this around why NATO and the West should avoid being actively involved so that it doesn't escalate and become a European war. But if we reach a point where the conflict starts to freeze on or around the line of control in the Donbass, I think it very likely that we will get very quickly back to where we were prior to February 2022, where everywhere else in Ukraine other than the Donbass, the West was very present and involved in arming and training the Ukrainian armed forces.
There are reports of Ukrainian strikes on fuel depots in Russia. There have been a couple of these actually over the last month. Do we as a country support Ukrainians' right to actually take the attack onto Russian territory?
Of course we do. I mean, the fact is that Ukraine is a sovereign country that was living peacefully within its own borders, and then another country decided to violate those borders and bring 130,000 troops across into their country. That started a war between Ukraine and Russia, and in war, Ukraine needs to strike into its opponent's depth to attack its logistics lines, its fuel supplies, its ammunition depots, and that's part of it. So, look, I clearly regret all loss of life, be it military or civilian, and where the actions are indiscriminate from whichever side, the UK government will call it out. But it's completely legitimate for Ukraine to be targeting in Russia's depth in order to disrupt the logistics that, if they weren't disrupted, would directly contribute to death and carnage on Ukrainian soil.
Could they use British ordnance at all to do that? Is there any concern that any of the weapons we've given them for defensive purposes get used in that? Would that cause any problems?
Well, I think it is certainly the case that things that the international community are now providing to Ukraine have the range to be used over the borders, but that's not that's not necessarily a problem. I think there are lots of countries around the world that operate kit that they have imported from other countries, and when those bits of kit are used, you tend not to blame the country that manufactured it. You blame the country that fired it. Now, Ukraine is targeting what I would say are completely legitimate military targets to disrupt Russian logistics supplies. And, the fact is that they make those choices, just as the Russians make the choices to indiscriminately bomb Ukrainian towns and cities.